Welcome to our very first live edition of our New Reality With series, which is a program co-produced by PhocusWire and Phocuswright, where we chat with industry leaders about the changing landscape as a result of COVID-19. So our guest for this first live event today, we have Beth Taylor, who is the head of marketing and communications at ATPCO, which is the world's leading provider of pricing and retailing content, tools, and services to airlines, GDSs, travel agencies, and travel companies. So thank you, Beth, so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me, Jill.
I think we build this as a Friday fun day. Maybe we'll make it a little fun. Or
That's right. That's exactly right. Break some bread.
Yes, exactly. So how this is going to work, we're going to have a chat for about 30 minutes or so, and then there'll be a Q&A portion at the end. So anyone tuning in, if you have a question, there should be a little Zoom Q&A button. So put it in there and we'll get to as many as we can at the end. So, all right, Beth, let's get started. You know, new reality, we're looking forward and recovery, but before we can do that, we have to kind of look back and see how this all started. So take me back to as the coronavirus crisis unfolded, what were the immediate steps ATPCO took and for its airlines?
Yeah, so, simply said, we got down to business pretty swiftly. I do think it's important to set some context here. So for those that are unfamiliar with ATPCO, we're a fully airline-owned company. Our board airlines are some of the largest ones in the world, representing every region. We actually sit at the table with about 440 airline customers and 200 plus channels. So a lot of voices there. We are an enabler to get all content to all channels everywhere in the world without worry. So you can kind of imagine the breadth and depth of those relationships left us with many, many conversations to have.
I'm sure, yeah.
Not just to understand their unique situations, but what are the pain points in their markets? What are the pain points within their organizations and with their customers? And really getting a detailed look at what's going on inside their business. So first and foremost, what we heard loud and clear was maintain core operational reliability, right? Mm-hmm. So if everything around you is suddenly uncertain, the last thing that you want to be awake worrying about is someone that's a trusted partner in getting your product to market. Right. So double down on, zero service disruption, making sure that pricing and retailing content was flowing. So again, they just didn't have to worry about us as one more thing in the platform. So to really serve as a way to help them and lean on you in that regard. That is exactly it, right? So, our board airlines, our biggest partners, the sentiment is the same, right? It is, mm-hmm. Please help us get through this. Our business model is managed to cost, which means that we don't exist to make money. We exist so that everyone else can thrive. And that comes with a lot of responsibility in this kind of market, right? So they have all these uncertainties around the market, cash flow, operations. How can we help them stabilize the ship, right? What is the tangible value where we can leverage our network, our expertise, our infrastructure, really to almost double down as a modern utility, right? Mm-hmm.
Right. And I know you developed some products that have helped the market recover or in their recovery. Can you talk a bit about some of the products you built for this crisis specifically and what those are designed to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, our business model was kind of made for moments like this. We have the infrastructure and the reach to get these things moving quickly. A lot of our value and our product focus is around retailing and pricing, and like I said, leveraging the nature of our platform. Mm-hmm. From a retailing standpoint, we immediately went to work on what airlines would need as part of their retailing strategy to reassure flyers, both in the early days and all the way through wherever this takes us, right? So we launched, I believe it was actually April 7th, if you can believe.
Oh, wow.
Very, very early.
Very speedy, yes.
Very speedy. An initiative around reassurance UPAs, which are called, UPAs stands for Universal Product Attributes, but they're illustrative graphics that represent all of those kind of trusted new experiences that flyers are looking for as they think about flying with COVID in the market. So that's like clean air circulation, hygiene practices, health screenings, and actually a lot of them have evolved even since then. So like mask requirements are a new one. You know, as those flow through, we are very quickly and agilely responding to make sure that airlines have access to these. We built them pro bono, and again, a perk of our platform. And, you know, since we launched them, we have about 110 airlines actively using them, which covers about 73%, I want to say, of the global flight schedule. So a lot of really good stuff on the retailing side.
Right.
The pricing side, if I can expand on that, because we also had a pretty big effort around the emergency flexibility conditions. So, you know, for anyone that's kind of familiar, I mean, I'm sure everyone on this call is familiar with the conditions that are around when you purchase a ticket and when you can change those tickets and the fees associated with them. We wanted to put a solution in market that allows airlines to override some of those existing fare rules and change fee waivers. So that coding logic ultimately makes it way easier for airlines to provide passengers with flexibility. We launched that about a month ago. And, you know, that kind of solution and like the collaboration between airlines and systems and channels usually takes, you know, upwards of months to a year. We did it in weeks, right? So by the time that hit market, I think we have about 30 airlines actively already implementing and coding against that logic.
Right. And a lot of these products are, you know, designed to reinstill this trust that was really just gone with COVID and the lack of travel and everything going on. So, you know, rebuilding that trust is such a huge critical component. Can you talk a bit about the role of trust and how you really rebuild that with customers?
Yeah, so there's a kind of a corny saying that I come back to a lot, and it's the concept of all boats rise, right? So it's not about any one business right now, right? It's about the entire market. Again, to your point about rebuilding trust, it's not necessarily the B2B perspective. And if anything, I actually think the crisis has cemented a lot of shared trust within industry organizations. But really what you're getting at is like, how does the entire industry rebuild trust with flyers, right? So there's this point about, you know, empathy and understanding flyers' uncertainties. And like when everything happened, it happened for all of us at the exact same time, everywhere in the world, right? So we understand it as an individual all the way through a professional to an organization level to an industry level. And so that shared experience should allow us to be really smart about how, what we know we need to rebuild trust. And that becomes fragmented based on personal preference, becomes fragmented based on leisure versus corporate. That willingness to travel is something that we all have to keep an ear to the ground on.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned, you know, the data platforms or systems that kind of need to come together to fully do this. How are you sort of uniting these different data sets and how they can come together to rebuild trust, to get operations running, to get all of that?
Yeah. So data is our language, ATPCO. If nothing else, we know data, and you know, data stability just doesn't exist the way that we've thought of it in the past. And all those technologies and software algorithms that support rapid, you know, the rapid ingestion of that data, a lot of those data sources are out the window, right? That's not another financial collapse, it's not another 9/11. You know, I think it took the whole industry a moment to recognize that and realize what that scale of data fluidity means. And I feel like since then, the race has been on, right? The race has been on to understand the market indicators, the economics, consumer sentiment, demand curves. You know, I was talking to someone a few days ago, and I was saying, like, you know, there's like this race to understand the chessboard, right? And you know, some of the pieces are missing. There might be checkers on the chessboard. You know, one colleague of mine even said, like, it's not even a chessboard anymore.
What is it? Yeah.
so that race is on, right? And so you've
Uh-huh.
seen a lot of really great things come out recently, like the data insights platforms that IATA McKinsey published, BCG, ARC, and through Victor's, Cambridge's Aero 80 platform. Like these are all tools that we need, and we need folks working against like aggregating those data sources.
Mm-hmm.
But then to me, that next lever is like, how do you take those platforms and make sure they're integrated with real-time
Right. Yeah.
customer? I mean, like the customers that were flying before are different. Like every unique route that is still flying has a different makeup.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to be able to kind of integrate that data through to real-time, week over week changes in demand and who those individuals are.
Right. Yeah. The flying demographics, can you talk a bit about how that has changed and how that might continue to change as we go through this recovery, as things sort of start to open up, they might not start to open up, that complicates recovery in a way. So what does that look, how are demographics changing and how do retailing strategies change because of that?
Yeah. I mean, I think complicated is an understatement. So, we were doing some work with a few airlines on like really multivariate testing and evaluating like what the buying demographic and flying demographics were of specific routes, how our retailing strategies can support those routes. And they were nuanced already, right?
Mm-hmm,
the difference,
right.
Business traveler, leisure, family, individual, all the little like data crumbs around those purchasers. Like I said, all of that data is actually out the window, right? So if your motivation is predicated on safety or hygiene, or, even though like I might be typically much more of a business traveler, if businesses aren't allowed to travel, then you've got a leisure component that's totally changing the landscape of my my data. So from a retailing standpoint, I think, airlines are forced to become incredibly agile in how they're looking at the new data flowing in, marrying that with all of these like collaborative platforms where, we're plugging in the right data sources together. There's still a ways to go, but like I said, I think the race to understand the chessboard is on, and there's a lot of really smart people tackling it. So, I think the takeaway there is that each unique route, each unique market, country, airline, they're all dealing with completely new data sources. So the retailing strategies are going to have to be always on and adaptive.
Yeah, that makes sense. And more broadly speaking, how are airlines sort of viewing recovery in terms of, their priorities before coronavirus were on innovation, be it NDC, all of that. And as you touched on earlier, there's this operational component to make sure you're still operating as all of this happened. So how are they kind of viewing their priorities, particularly long-term, in terms of what they need to do and where that focus is?
Yeah. I think the idea of like thinking about recovery is key, right? So we are not there yet. And if you look at industry media and marketing or your LinkedIn feed, you might have the sense that we are in like a 70-30 split of strategy and planning and forecasting and all those things that are like recovery based and idealistic, right? Versus tactical, operational in nature. That 70-30 perception is flipped, right? So what airlines are focused on are near-term, like reducing cash burn, internal operations, all of those things I just mentioned on like how to rebuild trust at the same time with totally new, data supporting their flyers. Airlines are still saying, "Help us get through this," right? They're not doubling down on like what does 18 months out look like. Right. So that shift in priorities, to your point about like innovation and things like NDC and dynamic pricing, the long-term vision is still there.
Okay.
What I do think we're seeing though is a gap widening between those that had already started along their journey and balancing the investments that they're going to make while they're dealing with everything else, and then those that hadn't started. I kind of, I think of it as like, if everyone has a house that was built in the 1960s and we all know we need to renovate that house, if you were in the middle of a renovation, you're probably more likely to like maybe see some more of it through. If you have a government subsidy helping you renovate, you might not be as worried about moving things along. If you don't have either of those things, you're probably going to wait and seek out some greater stability before you start to move. So a lot of the gray space that was in between where people were along the path, like I said, I kind of see a widening gap in up until we kind of get through to a recovery state.
Got it. And where's the role of scenario planning in all of this? You know, with what IATA is doing, how does that factor into any airline recovery efforts and how they, you know, prioritize and do things?
Yeah. So, you know, scenario planning is just simply critical, and not just from a data standpoint, which we touched on, but I actually think it's the exercise of creating a dialogue around what people's tolerance are for the uncertainties in front of us, right? So when you're making decisions, you know, these scenario planning efforts allow you to start from a level of the same playing field on what you kind of are reading from the market, from your buyers, from societal and government indicators, et cetera. At ATPCO, like you mentioned, we were very closely aligned with IATA and the you know, the economic reports coming out of there. We're actually publishing a scenario planning report ourselves about every week to everyone internally within ATPCO, as well as sharing with customers. It's fit to purpose for our specific area of the market. But we're looking at these major indicators, and it's very clear that the optimistic scenario is past. We're clearly in new normal, but you know, new normal is defined by stability at the in 2021, about 70 to 80% RPKs by the end of 2021, but it's not cemented, right? So there's still a look at all of these indicators coming in to say, like, are we really looking at an end of 2021 date, or are we looking at a slower recovery, which means it drags to 2022? And in those scenarios, you know, you're looking at, in one, you might have constrained budgets, and the other, it's a step beyond constrained budgets to like keep the lights on as we get through this. So yeah, scenario planning is critical. ATPCO's of, you know, moving fast against it, working with IATA. But again, the data is one thing. The actual dialogue that it creates with your decision team is a totally other thing. Right.
And to go back to a point you said earlier about, you know, coronavirus happened to everyone at the same time, everyone in the industry at the same time, everyone in the world at the same time, not a, you know, one carrier, one region, any of that. Can you talk a bit more about some of the opportunities that presents? I know you mentioned, you know, more different parties are working together that perhaps didn't before. What are the opportunities there, and particularly as it relates to recovery from this?
Yeah, I mean, what an exercise in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You know, I think everyone found themselves in the same boat, which is you were having phone calls with people that maybe you hadn't talked to in months, in years, decades. And those phone calls, even if they had a business, they were based on a business relationship, you know, very often they went into personal, they went into theorization of like what was going to happen within the market, within the industry, within specific businesses. There's a tremendous amount of energy and quite frankly, smarts being dedicated towards like this is happening at the same time. What can we do to work together to get through this, you know, collaboratively? On some, I kind of broken it down into three areas. Some of it's commercial minded. So like the Acelia Farelogix deal, which moved rather quickly. You know, that's more of a commercial orientation. I think there's a consolidation of strengths between some of the disruptors, right? So people that may have seen themselves as competitive are looking for the like prime sub relationships so that they can optimize each other's strengths in a market where airlines have less, you know, there's maybe a greater barrier to entry on transformation. And then some of them are just altruistic, right? Which is really a space that ATPCO knows well. You know, I think you guys covered the Trav Scrum Hackathon last week. like, I'm looking at the data of the number of participants and submissions to a hackathon based on rebuilding trust. And because it's virtual, you've got lower barriers to entry, 86 submissions. I've never seen a hackathon with that many submissions in that short of a time period. So, it speaks to energy, it speaks to open-mindedness and working across, and it hasn't gone away. It's there.
Right. Yeah. That sort of leads me to, how the industry is shifting in that regard with regards to what people are doing with their time now, what people may or may not be doing in an employment capacity. The travel industry has been shaken up dramatically, and a lot of people have, lost their jobs. And a problem there is that, that might mean that they leave travel and we're losing that particular talent in an industry that needs it. So curious your thoughts there on, talent and how to retain it within the industry so that we keep them here and keep them around.
Yeah, this is a topic that's actually very near and dear to me. I came into travel 3.5 years ago from tech. So, I am one of those kind of new joiners, fast learners, but applying technology experience to air travel. We can't let a mass exodus of talented, smart people leave the market, right? And I don't think they want to either, right? And it's not just, new talent from other industries, but it's also, the folks with decades of experience where that mentorship matters, right? And so it's actually something I don't have an answer for, but it's kept me up at night, which is like, how do you make sure that there's still funding sources for some of these new disruptors who they're fresh out of grad school, they know what they need to do, but they need to have access to funding to, pay their rent.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And like I said, you have this idea of senior levels. Sometimes there's a first in, or last in, first out mentality. That's not always the right move. But at the same time, you also don't necessarily need to run towards pushing everyone out, but in some sort of model that doesn't embrace the experience piece of it. So long story short, I think we need to find programs and collaborative methods across the board to create networks for these individuals. So even if they do leave the industry, they can come back. And if they are furloughed and they're waiting for their chance to come back, how do you create mentorship, right? How do you merge deep expertise with deep willingness to learn at a time when, again, I think the energy's there, people's attention is there, the engagement's there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to use the word downtime because that is not the right word, but a lot of us have a different opportunity to look at personal and career development while we're stuck at home. So, people are tuning into webinar. As we all know, webinar traffic is just through the roof right now. Because people are hungry to learn. They want to invest in themselves. They want to invest in their occupation. How do you view that? And what have you seen people doing now to invest in their personal and professional and organizational value?
Yeah. So ATPCO is actually in a great position to see that data ourselves, right? Because we're not about necessarily a thought leadership or a media-based webinar, right? It's about expertise and leveraging kind of this downtime to push along standards efforts that, standards are something many folks in the industry know we need in order to cut down to create efficiencies so we can implement things faster. But this would be a perfect time where if you have capacity, why not be collaborating on those things that you wish you had more time to do, because it eventually allows you to cover more quickly. Exactly. So yeah, I mean, we've actually, to your point, on the business side, our logins are through the roof of where they used to be. We've seen people reemerge that, they're customers of ours, but we weren't talking every day. And even, the emergency flexibility topic, that was the most engaged and participated series of content that we had ever had, which is a lot for, people that are trying to learn, and they're trying to learn fast.
Right. Yeah. Just on the topic of this virtual environment and how we're all learning to do business and live life and work with our teams, what have you learned from this experience remote, and what might you carry into when we get back to some sense of normalcy that you've taken from this period?
Yeah. So the learning curve was fun, especially for anyone that, has had family in their house at the same time. From a real application sense of it, Zoom call etiquette is its own thing, but what I've really kind of honed in on is, you have to have your digital literacy in mind, right? So that is not just a digital marketing responsibility or a customer service responsibility. Like, digital literacy has to be owned by everyone, which is becoming an expert in communicating through virtual formats, on-demand formats, allowing people access through digital platforms. The idea of kind of hard selling doesn't exist anymore, right? It shouldn't come back, quite frankly. I think the point on this all happened to everyone at the exact same time. Like, having empathy in a B2B space is huge, right?
Yeah.
And the focus on value versus just churning content for the sake of content is a big one. And, again, back to just the virtual format, you don't have the same cues that you would have if you're at an event or in person. Like I said, you really need to know the people on a different level, and that those conversations can happen on almost like a quasi, it's professional, but a quasi networking angle. You have to invest in that time, even through the virtual.
Right. Yeah, definitely. All right. Let's ask a little more question here, one more question here, and then we've gotten some questions from the audience. But, just for you personally, what's been sort of the most enjoyable or least enjoyable aspects of the past few months? I know it's a change in work environment for everyone, and everyone's circumstance is different. So how's it been for you?
Yeah, it's been interesting. So I'll take a personal slant with this one. So I'm a single mom of a 5-year-old. It's almost 6 years old. And, managing crisis response in the middle of one of the most impacted industries with that kind of pressure on the family side, pretty crazy, right?
Yeah.
But what it kind of lended out of it was, obviously to relationships, a close relationship with my daughter, but, this element of fun that got injected into our day-to-day life. I have a trampoline in my kitchen still.
Yeah, that's a new quarantine type activity I've not heard.
We fostered baby chickens for a little bit. We butterflies. I've bought a kayak. That stuff is just, stuff that I probably would have gotten to when I had time. But, for anyone that works as much as we all do, the work-life balance piece of it was helpful, because, I kind of have to get forced to find that balance sometimes. And that. I would say, though, on the, what's the least enjoyable? I want to get back to flying, right?
Yeah.
I miss long haul flights where I can watch a movie in peace, and I miss riffing in person. And for anyone that's extroverted, and my team has introverts and extroverts on it. The extroverts are all just yearning to kind of see each other again, and the introverts are oh, I'm peace, I'm buying a farm, that kind of thing.
Totally. Yeah.
And I just want to get back to it. I want to.
Yeah, I think for travel in particular, because so many people are used to not being in one place for that long, this has been a whole new experience. So I think everyone's eager. Okay, great. So we're getting some questions. So let's move into some of these audience questions. Here's one on NDC. So what are you seeing in the airlines' attitudes towards NDC and NGS, given everyone is trying to survive? Are they pulling back or being more aggressive? Is it still a priority?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It is still a priority, absolutely. And, direct from our board, which, like I said, is the largest airlines in the world. While they've said there may be a need to slow down investments because of all these other things that need our attention in the near-term planning horizon, the clear the clear direction from them is, while you might need to slow down investments, do not take your eye off of the long-term course, right? And that gets back to, like, from an airline standpoint, some airlines were well on their way, so they might carve out more money from their, kind of reduced budgets to investing. And we're there for those airlines, right? Like, that's ATPCO's role, is to help, whether you are full down the path of dynamic offers and continuous pricing on an NDC platform, or you're, operating in a traditional or a traditional distribution mindset. Like, we exist to help everyone, right? So yeah, we're not taking the foot off the gas, but we are focused first on, again, the direct ask from airlines is, help us get through this. So focus on that first, and then operating on the side with the rest.
Great. All right, and another one here. Beth, great interview. Can you give us a personal perspective on what the airport passenger experience might be in, say, 2 years' time? Will it have changed or reverted back to normal?
Ooh, I'm glad it wasn't near term, because I was supposed to go to Palm Beach tomorrow, and I'm canceling the flight.
I'll go to Florida, that's for sure.
Right. So the airline experience in 2 years' time. So yeah, I mean, we've seen a lot right now on the contactless technology. I think everyone's been running at that. A lot of the conversations around, like, a common traveler profile, and like how that can be used to make the process streamlined. And, there was one company I'd spoken to at one point about, they were actually they did all the security beforehand and dropped you at the plane, subverting the entire airport experience overall. And they were getting funding, Series A or B at that point. So yeah, in 2 years' time, it's going to be interesting. I mean, a lot of that, back to the scenario planning, if the balance between transformation and innovation is not found with respect to keeping the lights on and getting through this, like, unknown period of, the quarantines and the border closings and, cash, bad debt and cash flow. If we can't find that balance, it's very difficult to predict 2 years out. Even like the current model of, stability by 2021, you're still not looking at 100% RPKs for 3 years, right? So 2 years out it might be incrementalism off of today's environment, which actually, today's environment, incrementalism has been very rapid. So it might be more than we think, but.
Yeah. And we use the phrase new normal a bit too much, but I don't think normal will ever return. It will always look different from here on out.
Yeah, there was something that I thought about with, about like airlines and what they're going to retain coming out of this, what ATPCO is going to retain coming out of this. And a lot of it's on soft stuff, right? So airlines and organizations like ATPCO and others, everyone is forced to operate in an incredibly agile paradigm, right? Which means that people that might have had a harder time moving at pace, they're forced to, right? They're forced to ingest new information. They're forced to leverage new technology to read the chessboard quicker. That stuff's going to stay, right? Which is a good thing overall for when we're ready to move. More of the mindsets are going to be in the state of, like, being able to adapt at pace.
Okay. All right, another one here. Can you give us a perspective on what new models in aviation might emerge as a result of changing patterns? Fewer long-haul flights, more hybrid long-haul carriers, et cetera.
Yeah, there's a lot of speculation right now on that. I think everyone wants long haul. Oh, I speak with a grain of salt, but everyone wants.
You want to watch a movie? I get it. You want to just get on.
I mean, right now the countries with regional networks and a very strong regional presence who aren't as handcuffed to some of the border closing and quarantine requirements, that's going to, I think, move much more quickly. I do think there's going to be some lessons learned between the LCC market, mid-size, and large carriers. Some of those lessons learned are going to shake out, I think, once we start to see some of the consolidation happen.
Right.
But again, back to that point about agility, I think everything is up in the air right now, which actually affords a tremendous amount of ability for airlines to re-strategize their brand, right? And so to the point of like hybrids, short haul, long haul, I think that we're going to see brands change, right? Like,
yeah,
we've already seen it actually.
We're seeing it. All right. What more can ATPCO and the industry do in terms of adding new content to reassure travelers and get them to travel with confidence? I think that goes back to the trust component of this.
Yeah. So, we have a subset of the reassurance UPAs that I mentioned, that from even when we launched them in April, there's ones that are coming out as clear winners in terms of like, you get multivariate testing between what people respond to. And then again, once we get the platforms merge that with their consumer data, their buyer data, that tells you this person, maybe it's a person that there's all this unstructured data that says they don't really want to be told to wear a mask, right? You might not want to show them the mask reassurance CPA. So as far as like new content, I think what we're trying to do is first and foremost, look for breadth, because we don't know yet what is going to be as responsive as the next thing. And then it's going to be around honing the data, like that week over week look at how do you merge the CRM and digital demand on the airline side with what's responsive on the visual queue and the amenity description queue, the attributes that channel would need to market for their buyers. That attribute-based discussion, if anyone was at Elevate last year, an attribute-based is a big component of NGS. You think of attribute-based for safety and hygiene and all of the new trust quotients that didn't exist before, or maybe were minimized before.
Great. All right, this might be getting towards our last one here, but how is ATPCO utilizing advanced analytics capabilities to drive industry insights?
How are we using advanced analytic capabilities to drive industry insight? I'm laughing because I used to work in advanced analytics, global marketing. So yeah, it's from a data standpoint. We have an effort internally. It's called Data 360, and it's our common data platform. A lot of it today we're using for internal purposes. We are working with our partners and with industry partners and customers to leverage that for, again, for altruistic use, right? Like we have no use to commercialize it ourselves. It's around like finding the partners that are doing the cool and interesting and neat things that help airlines get through this, and finding ways to integrate and to open the doors, right? So yeah, like I said, for right now, we're using a lot of this Data 360 platform to inform our scenario planning in concert with qualitative kind of anecdotes from board and senior advisory leadership, as well as a lot of the data coming out from IATA, which has been fantastic. We're still at the point of like, and I mentioned this before, but like, you got to start to integrate that data so that it can play together.
Right. Yeah.
Science between them. So I think that's the big next step.
Great. All right. Well, I think that's it for time today, but thank you, Beth, so much for being here with us today. This has been New Reality with a show co-produced by PhocusWire and Phocuswright, and we'll be back soon with another episode. So thank you.
Thanks, Joe. This is fun.
If you're looking for more great content, check out How I Got Here, a weekly podcast with people that have led successful startups and created cutting-edge innovations in travel and transportation. Produced by PhocusWire and Mozio, it has a catalog that includes Steve Kaufer of TripAdvisor, Kayak's Steve Hafner, Expedia's Ariane Gorin, and more. We get the stories behind these companies, the highs and lows, and a lot of gritty details. How I Got Here is available on PhocusWire.com and all the usual podcast platforms.